Much for joining us.
Good morning to you, Peter, and to the listeners of Channel Africa. Thank you so much.
Whilst this is a great development in many respects, when people discuss these inquests, there's one question that keeps coming up quite a bit, is why now when we've had decades of opportunity to revisit these issues?
Yes, these inquests and calls for trials have been impeded by the ANC government, quite specifically, as part of a deal among the ruling elites, between the ruling elites of the African National Congress and of the National Party, the apartheid government, that they should keep quiet and make sure that the atrocities of the apartheid regime are not exposed and individuals are not persecuted for their apartheid crimes. In return, obviously, the apartheid operatives will also keep quiet about the atrocities of the ANC, because there were atrocities committed by the ANC prior to 1994 against its own people. So when you read, for instance, some of the sworn statements and affidavits of Vusi Pikoli in attempts to reopen these cases, you see that people such as Thabo Mbeki and Bridget Mabandla was the Minister of Justice at the time in the early part of this democratic government, were directly involved in impeding the NPA, led even by Vusi Pikoli, Advocate Vusi Pikoli, in pursuing these cases. So it's not an accident. There were cases such as this one of Steve Biko, which were clear cases of prosecution, because those people never got amnesty and they should have been prosecuted straight away. However, the ruling elites, specifically under the ANC, actually then impeded that process. The families of the affected individuals have fought for a long time, up until now, to reopen these cases. Of course, some of them are being reopened because the perpetrators have died and are incapacitated or whatever. I mean, 1977 is 48 years ago, as you correctly point out. So the ANC has asked these people to escape.
So is it a question of the ANC has been forced its hand, or is it, as you suggest, maybe that because it's such a long time ago, there will be no real consequences now if the truth is found out?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of circumstances. I think it's becoming inevitable. The ANC is losing its grip on power. And there are different ANC factions. Ramaphosa may have his own atrocities and whatever else, but certainly those military type atrocities may not be as applicable to the UDF, although we must remember that when Steve Biko, the Craddock 4 was killed, which is another related case to this one, the apartheid regime announced that the suspect number one of killing the Craddock 4 was Azapo. And then that unleashed the UDF against Azapo members who were actually murdered across Uitenhage and Port Elizabeth, that whole area there around PE. So the UDF and the ANC have got their own atrocities around this issue. However, their monopoly on power is reduced, and the persistence of the families, the Steve Biko family, the Fort Galata, and so on and so forth, the Craddock 4, and many others, is starting to pay off to produce the desired results.
The Steve Biko story, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what happened. Is the issue more about assigning blame and getting specific people brought to account?
The Steve Biko issue and all these other issues, there are many that are not even mentioned yet. Wellington Chasbane and many others are not even mentioned so far. The Steve Biko issue, as a student of African politics and African political history, you will know that even from 1960 until now, even in the SADC region, there are people who are suffering either from political related torture by the state. In South Africa, we may even be leading in SADC in terms of political killings. The killing of Steve Biko, I'm talking about today, as we speak today, there are political killings. Steve Biko was one of those political killings amongst many. So the struggle against apartheid was also against a struggle against political killings, especially those political killings that are sponsored by the state or by people who are in power, politicians who hold office, and police, which is currently happening. So that's one element where these cases become relevant to say nobody should involve themselves in political matter where people are killed for their political views or because they are political activists and so on and so forth. Number two, the state itself needs to compensate those families financially and otherwise for reparations, pay reparations for the damage done to those families through those matters. Because Steve Biko was a family man, and Meso was Fort Kalata, Mhlauli, and others. So compensation needs to be paid so that the state does not allow or facilitate or even execute political matters without consequences to the state itself.
I mean, there's so many layers to this, and I think you sort of partially explained this recent establishment of a judicial commission to examine whether past ANC governments interfered with investigations of apartheid-era crimes. And I guess this is what you've been relating to, that we're having an actual commission to look into this is quite significant.
It is quite significant, and already even before the commission has met, on the internet you can get especially the testimony by Advocate Bikoli. Fortunately, is a trained advocate and experienced prosecutor in his own right. So the testimony and affidavit that he has written is of a very high quality. It leaves no doubt that the African National Congress leaders, the leaders of the National Party, had no intention of ever coming out clean among themselves and to the South African public for being fully accountable. You know, in the early 90s, I worked for the New York Times, in the Johannesburg bureau of the New York Times. And Joe Sranamane, who later became chairman of the DA, came to my office to say, Sandile, is there anything you can do to find my brother went into exile with the ANC? And the ANC is unable to answer about the whereabouts of my little brother went to join them in exile. And there are many families where, and Tokyo has said this in public, where comrades would be grabbed and shot in the back of the head, assassination style. So both the ANC and the National Party committed unspeakable atrocities against South Africans, against our own people. And they've covered up for the past 31 years instead of coming out into the open and admitting their shortcomings. Those shortcomings and that cover up has birthed the political killings and the general criminality of the state, the mafia state that we have now in South Africa.
What is making it easy for President Ramaphosa to allow these processes to happen? The commission he has control over, but I guess these legal processes, the ANC which he leads is allowing for it to happen finally. What's changed?
I think that you must remember that this commission that you're talking about now is actually a diversion, because they were pressed with actual court processes where judgments could be issued that would go against them. So this commission that Ramaphosa has actually issued, just like the one that he has created with Madlanga, in essence becomes some form of conciliation process that could divert attention from actual criminal liability to some form of settlement of some kind, whether it's financial settlement, some much more milder consequences, because they were hard pressed with the court cases and with top quality witnesses against them. So we must not think that this commission came about because of the kindness or the honesty and truthfulness of Ramaphosa. It was through the hammer blows that were being delivered by the families of the deceased, of the unfairly murdered political activists. It was like that, just the same way that Zuma authorized the Zondo Commission, not because he was kind, no, it was because all legal options were now closed to him. He could have even been arrested for contempt and other things even much earlier than he actually did later on.
I mean, as you speak, I'm hearing in my head that this could be beyond embarrassing if particularly there are people still quite senior within the ANC that are alive today that could be implicated in this.
No, there's no question. In fact, the first one implicated in this is Thabo Mbeki himself. If you read the affidavit of Vusi Pikoli, and you'll remember that Pikoli won in 1 year the World Prosecutor of the Year award. So, the quality of the witnesses and the records that are aligned against some of these elites, especially Bridget Mabandla and Thabo Mbeki, and they are not necessarily being implicated in killing specific people, but in the cover-up and in the ability to obstruct. As we can see now, the allegations by Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi are being diverted in this direction and that direction, in the same way that there was a big struggle to arrest and incarcerate Jackie Silebi and so on and so forth. So the culture of cover-up in terms of the ruling elites of this past, let's say starting in 1990, probably 35 years, it's exactly that we're facing, and they need to come out into the open, all of them. I'm just mentioning 2 names, but there are many more in the National Party, some probably in the DA by now, some because the National Party went in that direction, some still in the ANC, etc., etc.
Sandile, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Your analysis and insights always greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time.
You're most welcome, sir.
That's Independent.